Hey everybody, welcome to another video from Electronic Armory. In this video, we're going to show you how to retrofit core data into an existing project you may already have. You may have accidentally forgot to tick the core data checkbox when initially creating the project, or maybe requirements have changed since you started it. I've had to do this a few times in my own projects, and it's simple once you understand the different components to it. Those components include the core data model, which defines our entities and our attributes that we'll be storing in core data, and finally, the code that interacts with the core data technology. I'll be providing a basic version of that code encapsulated in a controller class for your convenience. I'll provide a link to the code in the description below. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with a single view application here, and I'm going to leave that checkbox unchecked to use core data. All right, so once we have our project created, or if you're already in the middle of the project and again you realize that core data would be an optimal solution for you and you haven't added it, there's a couple steps that you need to do. One is we need to add the core data model, as I mentioned. So in your project, add a new file, and you're going to scroll down until you see core data, and the one that you want is that data model. Again, this is going to define our entities and their attributes, and I'm just going to stick it in the project file here. All right, then you get your core data model, and you can generate your models here. For this one, I'm just going to add a single entity, and we're going to call it, for our entity, just double click on it, call it car, and then adding an attribute. I'm just going to give it a, let's say the year of the car. Of course, you can do make and model, all that fun stuff. Year can be a integer 16-bit. And now we have our model set up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the code that interacts with core data so that we can start talking to the database and adding our entities and saving those entities or persisting them. If you're unfamiliar with core data, I have a video on that as well. You can look for that one in the channel. But for this one, I am going to add a new file. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class. And for this one, I'm going to call it database controller, and is going to be of type NSObject. So the name database controller, type NSObject, obviously it's going to be Swift. And we're going to add this to our project folder as well. Now I already have this code because I pulled it out of an old project's app delegate. And so if you have that checkbox checked when creating a project, it'll put all the core data stack code in your app delegate. But that's a pretty terrible place to put it. So I like to put it in its own controller class. And I'm going to paste it in here with a few modifications. First, I'm going to import the core data module so that we have access to its functions. And those errors will go away. The one thing I did was I changed the persistent container, the container of the file that contains our actual core data models and all the different values that we add to the database. I changed it from a lazy load variable into a static variable so that this becomes a static class that we can access from anywhere. The other thing you need to do is I just kept this default name for the core data model as just model. In your database code, when you're loading that persistent container, you need to give it the same exact name. So I'm going to call it model. Again, this should match up with your core data model file that you're trying to load into your persistent container. All right, and the other functionality that this has is we're able to save that context. It'll check to see if it has changes, and if it does, it'll go ahead and save it and then catch any errors that pop out of that. And so again, I just got this code from the app delegate, changed it around a little bit so I could stick it in its own file. This file will be linked in the description below. And so once we have that all ready to go, let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to go back to our view controller, and I'm just going to instantiate a car model really quickly. So we can say car equals, and as you can see, because we added in core data in those steps, we do have access to that car class. The next thing I'm going to do is call its constructor, which is going to ask for manage object context. Now, normally if you kept this in the app delegate, you'd have to call the application's shared instance and then grab its delegate and then typecast it as your application delegate, namely the app delegate. And then finally, after you do that long string of code, then you can get the functionality on it. By putting it into its own database controller, we have the ability to just do this. We can just say database controller dot managed object context, and voila, now we pass in that managed object context, which corresponds to our model data model, the model that we defined here. Okay, and because the car has a year on it, we can just say car.year equals, and then some 16-bit integer, say 2019. And then finally, since we've added that to the database context, we can then save it just like that. We don't have to pass it in anything because our database controller has that saved context. Now, when you pass in this managed object context, because it's part of the database controller, that when we say save that context, it automatically knows that this car is on that context. It'll persist it down to the iPhone's or iPad's disk, and you'll be all set to go with core data. So again, if you need a refresher on core data, I have a video on that. I'll link it in the description as always. But that's all I got for you. This is a really quick video. This video was created for a subscriber by request. If you want to get your own issues resolved, I'm now taking on developers who want to take their development skills to the next level through a Patreon page. Becoming a Patreon will allow you access to our learning community to get one-on-one help from me, code you can use in your own projects, such as this database controller, but larger and more intricate files, and also many more resources to make you a stronger developer, whether you're developing games, Android, iOS, server, or web applications. Sometimes you just need some feedback or career advice, and I'm happy to provide that. So follow the link in the description below to find out more info on that. But thank you, and I'll see you next time.